it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen. I Know My House is Haunted by Boe Whiskey. I know there are things in my house. Other things, other beings. I'm used to this, actually. It's just part of who I am and what my home is, and has been for as long as I can remember. They always come and go, usually without much damage. Even the stubborn other things eventually can be dispelled. But the ones that have come to me recently are unlike anything I've dealt with before, and I fear they may be the end of me. I'm trying to recall when exactly it began. My days have become blurry, but I'll do my best. I believe the first instance where I noticed signs that these new things had arrived, well, I remember there being small signs. Things moved around, items disturbed or misplaced, an uneasy feeling of not being alone, temperature changes, faucets running, floorboards creaking. The typical signs of a haunting, you know? Well, I've become accustomed to them, so they don't frighten me, but they do make me alert. Not everything that passes through my home has always been very friendly. I started becoming alarmed when I noticed wallpaper peeling off of the walls in one of the upstairs bedrooms. I know that over time this can happen, but it was coming off in large strips and I could hear it being ripped away from the wall. The sharp tearing sound startled me as I rested one evening. I followed it to see the decorative damask wallpaper that my grandmother had installed being destroyed. Bits of it were already on the floor, and the wall itself looked as if someone had taken a knife to certain parts of it. Edges were lifted up, and I watched as they were pulled away from the wall in various strips and pieces. With each tear of the paper, I felt my heart being torn. My grandmother had so meticulously picked that wallpaper out and even asked for my opinion. In the end, she'd chosen one of the ones that I told her I liked. It was as if this unseen force was just ripping at my memories without consideration. I yelled. I screamed. I pleaded for whatever it was to stop, to leave it alone. It paused for a few moments, and I felt the air near me shift. I didn't move, not out of fear, but out of shock. I still stared at the ripped wallpaper. The things that came into my home had never destroyed something like this. After a few minutes, it began again. I tried desperately to make it stop. I pushed the strips against the wall. I cried. I begged. Nothing worked. I worked myself into such a frenzy until my energy was spent and I collapsed onto the carpeted floor. Eventually, I fell asleep or passed out from exhaustion. When I awoke, an entire wall's worth of wallpaper was in tatters on the floor. The bare wall that had been previously hidden made my heart hurt, and I forced myself to leave the room, dejected and downtrodden. The wallpaper tearing continued in spurts over the next few days, along with the other normal haunting signs I'd mentioned before. I took to entering the room a few times a day and asking for whatever it was there to just stop. I asked what it wanted, how I could appease it. I was always to no avail. I never received any type of message or sign, and it didn't stop until all of the walls were bare, and it only escalated from there. I was lying on my bed one day when I felt everything shake. I sat up, immediately wondering if it was an earthquake. I was about to climb out of bed when I noticed the edge of my blanket moving. And the foot of my bed, my comfortable duvet, was being moved away from the corners and bunched up haphazardly toward the center. The shaking had stopped for a moment while this happened, and I knew immediately that it wasn't an earthquake as I'd first suspected. "Stop!" I yelled. Well, it seemed to do the trick. The blanket stopped moving. The bed, however, began to shake again. I pulled my knees up to my chest and backed up against the headboard, pressing myself against it. A loud scraping sound emanated from the end of the bed, and it moved a few inches against the wooden floor. I gasped and yelled again for it to stop. "Please, stop. This is my bedroom. What do you want?" I screamed at the seemingly empty room. The bed moved another inch or two before it ceased. I didn't move, I didn't breathe, I didn't blink. My duvet was then ripped away from me violently. I grabbed for it as it was thrown to the ground. Fabric slipped against my palm, but my fingers found purchase on the edge of the blanket. I tugged it back toward me, getting a better grip on it with both hands. The blanket felt slack for a split second. Then the other thing that had a hold of it yanked hard, pulling my body along with it. I did my best to stay on the bed, but my shoulders and head were left hanging off the side of the bed. I clenched my fists around the blanket, refusing to release it. There was one more yank, more gentle than the one before, and I fought back with every ounce of strength I had. I took a moment to gather my thoughts before I righted myself back onto the bed. Before I could sit up, though, I felt a strange sensation on my right shoulder. It was a slight tingle at first, but in a matter of seconds, it felt like my entire shoulder was being grabbed by the devil himself. The pain was sharp and fiery. It burned into my body from one point and spread like shattering glass throughout my entire arm and down my back. I howled in pain and barely felt the bed being shoved over more from where I was. Whatever was in my house, it was strong and didn't care about me. I don't know how long it lasted, the pain and the bed moving. It felt like hours, but I know it couldn't have been that long. At some point, the pain began to fade slowly. I only laid there in agony as it dissipated. When it had subsided enough and I found some strength, I pushed myself up and saw that my bed was now against a wall, and my bedside tables, which had flanked each side of the headboard before, were now removed and no longer in the room. My blanket was mostly on the floor, and I saw some scratches on the hardwood floor from the bed being moved. I weakly pulled my blanket back onto the bed and curled up into a tight ball with it wrapped and bunched up all around me. Tears stung my eyes, but none came. Well, I wasn't broken yet, but I was feeling myself beginning to crack. I'd never dealt with anything this intense. I know it might not seem like a big deal to you or most, but in the moment, as these things happened to me, it was absolutely terrifying. I had experience with hauntings. I knew what to expect. It isn't like in the movies or books. It's usually more benign. Most people hardly even notice the presence of spirits because they're so innocuous. And places like my home that become sort of a way station are usually mostly left alone. They come, stay for a while, and then move on. Don't know why it happens this way. Can't even begin to try and figure it out, so I stopped trying a long time ago. All I know is they typically don't stick around. Some have been more persistent, yes, but simple tricks get rid of them. When small things are moved, I put them back. When they fog up the mirrors, I write messages asking them to leave. Even trying to talk with them directly can work. I even have certain protection symbols and items around the house to try and keep the beings moving along. If one's being stubborn, I can move one of my totems into a central place in the house, and once they encounter it, it aids them in moving on. Or if they came across one of the symbols expertly crafted and positioned in important corners of my home, they realize that this place is protected, and they let go. This new thing, though, had started with destroying my house and attacking me. This had never happened before. It had actually touched me, and the pain I felt terrified me to my core. Maybe I'm superstitious, but I began to wonder if this was some sort of demon. Things kept happening. My days melted together in a mess of pain, terror, and destruction. A wall in the foyer was turned to rubble. The stairs were torn apart and blanks of wood littered the floor. The kitchen was completely annihilated, as if a bomb had gone off amidst its barriers. Along with the damage to the property, I began smelling something. happened at least half a dozen times and always started the same, with a slight burning smell. Then a shifting cloud would form. As the cloud formed and moved itself through the house, stretching and contracting and stretching again, the air would increasingly begin to feel heavy and oppressive. The scent shifted to something else along with smelling burns. There was something else that I couldn't place my finger on. It lingered and made me feel sick. It made my head swim and my body feel weak. When it was abrasive enough, I'd find out later that I'd passed out. I tried everything. I moved totems into various places that would be easily seen. I wrote messages. I yelled. I pleaded. I offered deals. I made sure the symbols were visible. These were all met with harsh retaliation. The totems were ruined. The symbols were carved into, breaking the protection seals, and the messages were ignored. All of my pleas and attempts fell on deaf or apathetic ears and eyes. And then there was the altercation. An actual interaction that confirmed there was more than one being haunting my house. I was walking around my home, feeling my heart fall apart in shatters bit by bit as I surveyed the broken pieces of my life. When I entered what used to be the parlor, there was a new symbol on one of the walls. It felt ominous and dangerous. I approached it hesitantly and saw that the lines were impressed into the surface, as if carved with some sort of tool. The closer I got to it, the worse I began to feel. My vision became muddy and I couldn't focus on anything for too long. My chest felt tight and my body heavy. I took a step backward away from it and faltered a bit. I reached out for the couch and it wasn't where it belonged. I fell to the floor and crawled away from the wall. "Ah, there you are." I heard a voice from behind me. I looked over my shoulder and up at what had spoken. Still difficult to focus, even with the distance between myself and the symbol. All I could see were blurred edges of something clad in or made of black. I felt animosity pouring from it. "Who?" I tried asking, but felt too weak to finish. "You are unwanted in this place," it said. The voice was male, but I couldn't see any details of the creature. This is my home." I managed to get out as I struggled to stand, using a table to help steady myself. The thing spoke again, but I couldn't understand the words. He reached out toward me, and I bolted, almost tripping over myself. And it barreled after me, knocking over whatever was in its path. Chairs, tables, the umbrella holder, and more ended up upturned or shoved aside. I stopped suddenly when I entered the kitchen and felt something growing inside of me. It was a churning hurricane of fear and anger. I wasn't sure which I felt the most, but seeing the kitchen again, forced into this carnage that barely resembled the comforting room it had once been, shifted something inside of me and planted a seed of wrath. I turned on my heels and planned to barrel toward the creature, to be the attacker instead of the attacked this time. But just before my hands could make contact, it sidestepped me and yelled out something unintelligible. My body was pulled to the ground as if by some sort of force. I felt in my hands and knees, held in place somehow. The room around me spun and my vision went black, as it had before when I smelled that strange scent that made me sick. When I came to, there were more symbols on the walls, and I found that I couldn't leave the kitchen. I could stand, I could walk around, but I couldn't cross the threshold from the kitchen to the rest of the house. I couldn't explain it. After pacing for a while, I heard distant voices and saw shadowy figures from the adjacent room. They were blurry like the other one had been, and I couldn't understand what they were saying. There were 2 or 3 of them. It was difficult to tell, as their forms appeared to shift and meld into one another before separating again and moving around. The voices were strange and sounded too far off for the distance. "Please, let me go," I called out weakly. There was no sign of them hearing me or noticing me at all. The other things moved away from my sight, and I was left completely alone. I spent days there, trapped in the kitchen, tortured by the sounds of my house being torn apart. Occasionally one of the beings would appear in the doorway and say something in its demonic language. It would bring with it the dizzying smell, and when I was weak, it touched me and I felt that scalding pain as I had in my bedroom. I didn't know how much longer I'd be able to take it. Every time it happened, I became weaker and weaker. After, I don't know how many days, I was finally released from my kitchen prison. I don't know if it was on purpose or accident, but I was able to finally move about my home once again. I am trapped here, but at least I can move around. These things still haunt the walls and rooms of my home. They seem to still be intent on tearing the house apart. I don't know how to get rid of them. I fear they might be the end of me. Look, if anyone else has experience with this sort of thing, please help me. I'm at a loss for what else to do, and I worry that I'm running out of time. But, well, on the plus side, I did finally figure out how to possess a living human. Well, a bit of a switcheroo at the end there, wasn't it? Weren't expecting that to happen, were you? Neither was I. Well, that is the first story in too long, to be honest, from Boe, the wonderful author of Dead Man Running. One of the favourite things I've ever done here on the channel. I know you all love that one as well. So really, really happy to be working with her again. Shorter story this evening, but hey, I'm allowed sometimes, aren't I? Thank you very much. Well, back again with something longer tomorrow evening. This is just to help tide you over the weekend. So, till then, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.